Hey everybody, it's PartyElite, and today we're taking a look at another new set of mechanics from Total War Warhammer 3. This time for Khorne. Once again, there isn't any new footage or trailers or anything like that to look at, but we do have a handful of screenshots and an entire blog post to discuss. If you've been enjoying this coverage on the channel, don't hesitate to let me know down below. Leave a like, leave a comment, let me know, and I'll keep it coming. Now, I've been curious to see just how Creative Assembly approach Khorne. Tzeentch was a pleasant surprise and a bit of a bar-setting example, and Khorne is a much simpler entity by comparison, so I wanted to see exactly how CA would step up to the plate for, again, a relatively simple god as far as his core concept is concerned. They've come up with some pretty good stuff for what sounds like a very fittingly aggressive playstyle, but do keep in mind that these are just the generic Khorne faction mechanics, not the ones that get added on specific to any particular legendary lord. I'm sure we'll learn more about sub-faction specific mechanics in due time, but for now, with lots to discuss and no time to waste, let's begin. Skulls for the Skull Throne is a common war cry of any Khorne cultist worth their weight in blood, and so skulls are the unique resource for Khorne's faction. As one might imagine, skulls can be found from battles, after sieges, with post-battle decisions, and with dilemmas, buildings, and all other standard Total War fare. Enemies fighting amongst each other will also generate skull piles, which sound like points of interest on the campaign map, similar to, say, Encounters at Sea, in that it's a point on the map that you need to move to in order to interact with. That's just a guess, but I do feel like it's a fairly reasonable conclusion to come to. Either way, however you get your skulls, there are a few different uses for them. While this includes things like researching new technologies, the deadliest of uses involves piling skulls onto the Skull Throne to get some massive buffs. And while these include buffs to post-battle loot and movement range bonuses after raising settlements, it sounds like they include buffs to in-battle stats as well. All this plays into the aggressive nature of Khorne especially, encouraging the player to move faster from point of conflict to point of conflict, seeking more bloodshed and more skulls. I wouldn't have been surprised to see a Taurox-like momentum mechanic with Khornate armies, a way to get them going from fight to fight to fight with no time to rest. Another way to spend skulls is to occupy settlements. It's a pretty tongue-in-cheek but believable explanation. A newly conquered city needs to be adorned in skulls, and so you're literally using the same skulls that you'd lay at the throne to do some interior decorating instead. I mean, okay, look, it sounds kind of funny, but it's a legitimate explanation for how the currency is being spent. So I quite like it, actually. And that's not all, of course. There are rituals that need to be performed to appease Khorne, since, you know, he'd be pretty upset at this apparent show of pacifism. So skulls need to be used for those rituals of appeasement as well. The blog makes it explicitly clear that sacking and razing are the better option almost always, especially since you only need one colonized settlement in a province, and over time, any raised settlements within that same province will automatically be colonized by your people. So you can take advantage of sacking and razing, and eventually get a colonized settlement anyway. Sure, somebody could come through and steal it away from you first, but then you just go back in. Battle, sack, raise. The blood calls when a Khornate army conquers a settlement, and there are a variety of options unique to the Khornate way of life. When raising a settlement, two options are made available. Skulls for the Skull Throne will generate 1,000 skulls for you to use as you need, while destroying the settlement and killing its population. Blood for the Blood God, meanwhile, is the other option, granting a great deal of replenishment to your army, while also spawning a blood host army nearby. These are armies that cannot replenish or recruit, but they also don't cost any upkeep and are free to do anything else an army can. The power level of these armies scale with how many you've created, so from my understanding, the more you have, the stronger they get. And there are also ways to buff just how many units they spawn with through technology and, I imagine, decisions and things like that as well. Now, from my understanding, you have full control of this army right away, spawned with full movement points available. And again, this taps into what I was talking about just moments ago, a way to have a Khornate playthrough consist of relatively consistent aggression, one fight to another, especially if you're able to perform this blood for the blood god option in sort of a chain. By this I mean you conquer a settlement, raising it to spawn a blood host army, and then you send that blood host army to strike at a nearby settlement, raising it to spawn another Bloodhost army, so on and so forth. I'm curious to see just how far it can be pushed, but I do quite like it as an interesting way to create a terrifying Khornate tide without just reusing Torox's rather fitting mechanics. Naturally, these guys will suffer attrition and losses in battle, becoming less powerful over time, and since they don't replenish, they'll eventually die off. But skulls are skulls, and so they help, even in their death. Constant fighting and bloodletting sustains Khornate armies and factions. Slowing down the active pursuit of combat will adversely affect replenishment rates and faction-wide growth rates too. The blog post makes it sound like this will be paired with some unit stat debuffs as well, perhaps lowered combat stats when slowing down, while maintaining aggression either retains default stats or even goes so far as to give buffs. It sounds like buffs are applied to faction-wide growth rate and replenishment rates with reduced global recruitment time as well, but we don't know yet whether the replenishment rates and global recruitment times are impacted at a global level or per army instead. By which I mean, is it enough to have one very aggressive army, giving buffs to all your armies, or does each army individually have to be aggressive to take advantage of those extra benefits? Either way, it sounds like if you're able to sustain multiple armies that are constantly fighting, you're going to see some great returns. I do wonder if the momentum gain here doesn't get overwhelming too quickly, snowballing sooner than ever, getting access to higher level settlements and higher tier units quite quickly with the boosted growth rates from all the fighting. Khorne sounds like a relatively easy start, at least based on what I'm reading here, but time will tell. Unholy manifestations exist for Khorne just as they do for Tzeentch. Again, this is a generic chaos mechanic, but each god will have their own specific manifestations, and they will get buffed up if and when Khorne is ascendant. We discussed this in our Tzeentch video, so feel free to check that out for more details there. In the specific case of Khorne, as far as his unholy manifestations are concerned, we see Eternal War unlocked right from the start, allowing you to spawn a small Khornate army that'll attack your own army. It's a way to trigger bloodletting, to acquire skulls, and to gain XP. There's a 15-turn cooldown though to its use, so you can't just spam it to max out ranks and things like that right off the bat. Call of Battle requires 1,000 global Khornate corruption and gives any one army an extra 50% campaign movement range. Slaughter Incarnate requires 2,000 global Khorne corruption and doubles skull gains from battle for several turns for a specific army. Khorne's Glare, needing 3,000 global Khorne corruption, disables a friendly army's movement for several turns, but at the end of this phase, the local settlement is automatically raised, giving a huge number of skulls. This last one is wild to think about. It sounds like it applies to any size of settlement. So can you just camp right at the edge of a settlement's region, surrounded by maybe an extra army or two to defend with, and just kind of wait? I imagine it's got a longer cooldown time than just 15 turns, but this seems like a good way to just obliterate a well-defended, well-upgraded city with relatively minimal effort. In multiplayer, this could be infuriating to have happen to you. Imagine building up your capital all the way, only to have it ripped from your hands because all your armies are off elsewhere, while a few armies are waiting in a corner after somehow having managed to sneak in. And does that army using Khorne's Glare have to be a full stack? Can it just be a couple of units? It's perfectly fine for a player to end up extremely powerful by the endgame, in single player especially, sure, but to be able to easily wield that power against another player, that's where things get interesting in the not-so-favorable way. Anyway, it's a really cool ability in single player, and it should actually help remove some of the grind that plagues the later phases of Total War games. But we're not here to talk about plagues, not yet at least, so let's switch gears to cults. When a blood cult forms in a region due to ample Khornate corruption in the area, you'll have the option to build a building much like the foreign structures of Undercities and Pirate Coves. The building options include hideouts that provide a supply of skulls per turn, fighting pits that give bonus skulls for battles fought in the province, lodges to generate a large number of skulls per turn if a lord from any faction is present, and the arena, which destroys the cult but teleports the faction leader and their army to the settlement. That's that's massive. I mean, again, this is a really cool use of corruption. It actually makes it valuable and adds a reason to pursue the active spread of corruption rather than just passively let it happen. Imagine being able to teleport halfway across the map to hit a major city because you managed to generate enough corruption there, establish a cult, and then use the arena building to teleport over. Tzeentch and Khorne both have shown that CA are taking corruption very seriously. I'm really excited to see how the other gods can take advantage of it even more now. And I will say, Khorne's arena actually sounds more interesting than Tzeentch's equivalent, but maybe his control over the winds of magic will just make that much of a difference for Tzeentch. It just sounds like something that can benefit enemies as well, whereas Khorne's arena only really benefits you. Well, I mean, others can come through and colonize the raised settlement you leave behind, sure, but not until after you've had your way with it, right? A cool way to start a surprise invasion on a new target, this could be really fun to use, bringing out blood host armies at a completely new location, sending them out to burn down settlements that your new enemy thought would be safe from your violent tendencies, at least for a while. There's some really cool stuff going on. On the topic of friends and enemies though, Khornate Diplomacy is an interesting beast. Apart from Norskins, Warriors of Chaos, and Skaven, the mortal factions will automatically declare war on all non-Slaaneshi demonic factions. Demon factions can make alliances with Skaven factions, and they can make treaties with each other too, though they will have their rivalries and hatreds to consider, like Khorne and Slaanesh not getting along. Khorne does also get diplomacy debuffs from technologies and decisions, and Skarbrand's warband, the Exiles of Khorne, actually get diplomacy debuffs with other Khornate factions too, his past betrayals coming back to haunt him by giving him more easy targets to murder. But let's talk a bit more about the tech tree. There are multiple pillars of this tech tree, and you can see 2 on screen here. 3 of one pillar need to be researched before the next pillar is unlocked, and in total, there are 8 technologies per pillar, 8 being Khorne's sacred number and all that. This adds a fair bit of variety in how you progress from pillar to pillar, and hopefully it invites some varied playstyles and approaches. Still not as compelling as the Kislev tech tree, but I mean, it's Khorne. I don't think the sciences are his forte, unless it's the science of slaughter, which does seem to be the focus here. One of the pillars is all about getting buffs against specific factions. 8 techs, each one dedicated to a faction each. One would assume Tzeentch, Slaanesh, Nurgle, Kislev, Cathay, and the pre-order DLC, but what are the other 2? Skaven? Dwarfs? And what happens as new factions get added? Will Khorne see his tech tree get revamped? Apart from that specific pillar, there are other techs to make units better, cheaper, or more easy to recruit, and you can also improve blood host armies and chances of colonizing ruins as described previously by having that single controlled settlement in the region. These are all spread out across multiple pillars though, so it's not like you can just camp on top of one forever. You'll want to move between the pillars and unlock them all most likely. Skulls must be used to perform research, so you can see again how valuable a resource skulls can be. It sounds like they come around pretty easily though, especially when you're playing so aggressively. Khorne has turned out to be quite interesting. I'll be curious to see the sub-faction specific mechanics outlined in the future, but the Khornate mechanics, generically speaking, definitely feel suitably violent. I like the emphasis on maintaining constant aggression, and there are some really cool uses of cults especially here. That arena building sounds insanely fun and powerful, and I can see again actively pursuing the spread of Khornate corruption into a region just so I can teleport to it and cause mayhem. But I'm curious what you guys think about these mechanics and systems. Were they everything that you'd hoped for? Are you worried that they didn't get enough love? Anything in particular that stands out to you? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments down below. As always, I'm interested in knowing just how people feel beyond my own opinion, of course. As I've said before, for more Total War and strategy gaming content, don't hesitate to subscribe to the channel. And as always, a massive thanks goes out to all of the channel members and patrons who've been supporting the channel on a monthly basis. Y'all keep us alive and running smoothly. And of course, a big ol' thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.